Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the second part of freight acquisition management training. I'm going to reveal the board right here to you guys now. It's something I created. Figured this would be a pretty easy way to illustrate how these roles are behaving within the industry. Because of my experience, I know exactly how it is that carriers, brokers, and freight forwarders are operating. And this, I'm going to walk through each one of those roles. We'll look at the type of authority that those roles need in order to operate in transportation in the United States. And we'll talk about those activities that they're involved with as well today. So I've included links here. You can see that in the materials you received. So if you like, you can click on this link here and it'll give you a brief little history of transportation. Let's see. We'll get to the types of authority here in a second. It's pretty elementary. I just went and grabbed something really quick. So this will kind of talk you through the history of transportation. For me, when I walked through this really just illustrated even more the importance of the carrier because as I scrolled through here and was looking at this, I did not really see much about brokers in here. I didn't see much about freight forwarders in here. It primarily just talks about the carrier, which, in my opinion, and I think most logisticians in this industry would agree that the carrier is the most important part of this entire thing because without the carrier, nothing will move. We had a saying in the military when I was a truck driver that nothing happens until something moves. And that couldn't be a truer statement, in my opinion. So, the three roles that exist within the transportation industry, which require an authority from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, there's a link here to go there. Those three roles are the freight forwarder, it's the actual carrier, and we have brokers. So if we go ahead and go to the FMCSA website, go ahead and click on that. And here we'll get straight from the regulating body what it is that constitutes a carrier, what sort of authority it is that they can get. Well, actually, not what constitutes a carrier in all these roles, and then also what types of operating authority it is that you'll need in order to operate, depending on where you're located. So we can see here that there's a couple different types of carriers. We have a motor carrier of property, except for household goods. And then we also have a motor carrier of the actual household goods. As you can see here, what we need is in a hire carrier for good, they transport regulated commodities, except for the household goods, for the general public in exchange for payment. Motor carriers of property must file proof of public liability, so they must have insurance with the FMCSA in order to obtain interstate operating authority. So that's very important for people coming into the industry that want to become carriers because you will have to get insurance prior to getting that authority activated, which is why I suggest that individuals, when they're coming into this industry, do not just go and purchase equipment. There's steps that you should take in order to enter this industry economically and effectively. And just coming into it and purchasing equipment because we saw that a lot of people are making money being a carrier is not a great way of entering into business and setting yourself up for success, especially if expenses and finances are something that, may be kind of tight, right? And I'm only saying that because a lot of people that I work with in this industry and a lot of people that I've encountered while working at brokerages in this industry have been my people. And those are the ones who I see the most negatively affected by the impact of ignorance. And don't mean that negatively, I mean it as it stands, that there's an ignoring of the information needed in order to move effectively. And this manual, again, is going to change that. You see here, cargo insurance is not required, and that's because the carrier has the liability for the goods, and so they don't need cargo insurance because it's included in the property damage. So then we'll have a motor carrier of household goods. You guys go ahead and read through that. Our other one is going to be our broker, and this is an individual, a partnership, or a corporation that receives payment for arranging the transportation of property, except for the household goods, belonging to others by using an authorized motor carrier. A broker does not assume responsibility for the property and nevertheless never takes possession of it. So when we read this kind of reads a lot like how a dispatcher behaves, right? So most dispatchers, they have a company. They receive payment for arranging the transportation of property belonging to another person by using an authorized motor carrier. So we can see here, there's really not much difference between a broker outside of the fact that a broker needs to have an authority. However, and I'm gonna stop using the term dispatcher for a while, being an agent of a motor carrier allows you to be able to function as a broker does. So really pay a lot of attention to these wordings, and we need to be looking at this so we can understand what our activities are that we can do legally within the bounds of the authority. So a broker of household goods obviously is going to be the same as the broker of property, except it's going to be household goods, um, personal items and property being used in a home, registration as a household broker. If the motor carrier providing transportation will also provide some or all of the following additional services: binding and non-binding estimates, inventory, protective packaging, and unpackaging of individual items. So this means that the carrier would help to load, unload, and since it's household goods, kind of act as a moving company in a way. But that's only if it's a part of the contract that you have with the broker. We also have a carrier of international cargo. This company transports international cargo and is headquartered in the United States, but is owned and controlled more than 55% by a Mexican citizen or resident alien. International cargo must originate or be destined for a foreign country. Then we've got enterprise carrier of international household goods. Same thing. Except it's going to be household goods they're going to be moving. So very similar to what we talked about the broker with the household goods. And let's see, offer arbitration as a means of settling loss and damage. Oh, this is because they have actually possession of the freight. So that makes sense. And so here's some of the other authorities. We got freight forwarders. We got motor carriers that will move passengers, non-North American domicile motor carriers. So what this is a company that is in a different country other than North America that has an MC number, and the trucks that they work with and the company that they work with, companies like if it's a broker or a carrier, their work is being done in the United States. However, they are located in a different country other than North America. So that's Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Then we also have Mexico-based carriers, boom, shloom. And we got the Mexican certificate of registration for motor carriers and foreign motor private carriers, boom, shloom. All right, so those are our authorities that we can get within the transportation industry, and that covers all of our roles. Freight forwarder, we talked about the carrier, and we talked about the broker. Cool. So next, what we'll be talking about is the activities that they're involved with. So these are what we're calling the priorities, activities, concentrations, and tasks. These activities are the main things that are going on. There are some things in between these, which we'll talk about in our section called Read Between the Lines. But for the most part, each individual role here is going to be prospecting, and that is using tools to identify other entities to do business with. Once they have prospected and those individuals decide to do business, there's going to be quoting that happens, and they're going to be using tools to provide rates and to negotiate. Once they've negotiated and they've decided that they want to move forward with those shipments, we'll have shipment confirmation, which is using tools to send and receive shipment details. We also have, after shipment confirmation, we've got visibility and problem solving, which is using tools to send and receive shipment status. And then we also have, at the end of that, once the shipment does deliver, we're going to be using tools to send and receive shipment completion and invoices. So this is what kicks off our compensation activity. So the 5 PACs that every individual in this industry is doing is prospecting, quoting, there's going to be shipment confirmation, visibility and problem solving, and then compensation activity. Now, if we take a second to think about that, this would fit across any activity, I believe. This would apply to dating, right? So it you want to date somebody, you would be prospecting for those individuals, right? Except it's some sort of busyness, right? So it would be some sort of business. You prospect, we use apps, right? We use our car to go to these places where there's individuals that we would like to maybe form a relationship or partnership with. As we're talking to that individual, we're quoting, right? We're putting out there what it is that we can do. In most cases, going out to eat is a form of quoting, because you're showing that individual what it is that you would be able to provide through, and you're kind of negotiating, right? You guys are both talking about what it is that you're going to be doing for each other, possibly. Then we're going to have confirmation. You say, yeah, let's do it. Let's be in that relationship. You know what I'm saying? Let's make it happen. So you have confirmation at that point in time. Next, the relationship's going on. So now we're going to be watching to make sure that quoting, make sure that the shipment confirmation, what we got before, is still in effect. And then we got the, problem solving in a relationship as well, because this is when the activity is actually happening. Very similar to in logistics and transportation. Once you confirm that shipment, now what's going to be happening next is we're going to be looking to see what's going on. If that truck breaks down, we have to send that information to the customer to let them know what's happening and what sort of solutions it is that we're going to provide to solve that problem. Same thing in a relationship. And then at some point, there is going to be some compensation activity, right? You guys buy a house, you all get married, to decide to build a business together. Money is gonna start to become a factor in what's happening. In actuality, money compensation activity is kind of up in this quoting area as well in the beginning of that sort of relationship. But if we think about insurance agencies are prospecting for individuals, right? They'll quote those individuals on insurance. Once it is that person says they would like to get that insurance policy, they'll send it over to them and confirm that. Then in between that insurance policy and anything happening, there's going to be problem solving. So if I break my leg, I got to, call them up and let them know what's going on, and they need to solve that problem. And once that's over with, there's going to be compensation activity, right? Like I have to pay for my insurance policy. And I think that fits across every line. So this is what's going on. We've got prospecting, we've got quoting, shipment confirmation, visibility, problem solving, and compensation activity. Okay, so now we're going to talk about our shipper. The shipper is the most important person in all of this, because without the shipper, we would not have any products to move, right? So what we want to do right now is kind of define what a shipper is. So a shipper is an All right. So a shipper is an entity who manufactures, produces, or assembles goods to be delivered to the end user of the product. So a shipper could be, let's say a shipper could be, let me go ahead and do my young sugar to look at it. So a shipper could be, well, not could be, but a shipper is Amazon. Amazon, yeah, you know. Nike is a shipper. Nick probably works at Nike. Um, AutoZone, shipper, right? Mercedes Benz, they ship cars, right? USPS, shipper, all right? Your local grocery store, your beauty supply store, clothing stores, right? These are all shippers, right? So let's use our imagination right now and imagine the amount of places within our neighborhoods where shippers are just there. So I live in Memphis. Just walking from my home to the laundromat, which is like about a mile away or so, I walked past Lit Junior. I walked past Octapharma Plasma Collection. I walked past Little Caesars discount furniture store, Burger King, right? McDonald's, Subway. These are all places that trucks show up to deliver goods, which means this person is a potential shipper. All right. So now that we understand what a shipper is, let's talk a little bit about what a shipper needs. I'll keep hitting shift. So a shipper needs a, what do shippers need from us? You know what? Let's rephrase that. What do shippers need to fulfill their business needs? The shipper needs an, to do business. Typing terrible. FMCSA and that's what the shipper needs. You need to be registered to do business. You have to have your authority from the FMCSA and have the appropriate insurance level to cover the liability of the shipment in case there's damage. And as we saw, basically what a shipper needs is exactly what it is that the FMCSA requires the carriers to be, as we saw from the different authorities that you can get in the previous thing we were talking about when we were talking about the authorities, right? So once we do have that, then now the shipper, they can be able to do their job, right? Because they've got this entity, they have the authority, they got the insurance level, and so now this entity can do business with the shipper, and then we can get our goods delivered to us. So when a shipper does want to start doing business, let's say that that shipper is one that has products that need to be broken down or stored at a location. So some shippers may have a product that doesn't need to be shipped into a later date. However, they may not have a warehouse that's large enough to support all of the shipments that are coming in. So if that is the case, the customer would be prospecting for a freight forwarder. A freight forwarder is basically a broker that has a shipping location. Well, it has a physical location to be able to work out of. So the freight forwarder is going to have a warehouse. That freight forwarder is going to be able to store some of those goods there. They'll be able to, in some cases, what's called rework, which is move those shipments around and break them into different smaller shipments to be sent out to other locations. So that would be a great thing for a shipper because now that means they have an additional location where they can store and ship products out, not have to worry about that, and also continue with their normal operation because they don't have freight that's just like sitting around taking up space, not allowing them to fulfill some of their other orders that may not need that space. So once that customer does come into the industry, well, the shipper starts working with that freight forwarder. They're going to be prospecting for them depending on that freight. So, and then the freight forwarder can also act as the broker, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be any freight that the freight forwarder has to break down. It could literally be a shipment that the customer just wants to get picked up. So that freight forwarder can behave like a broker as well, although there will just be an additional liability, right? Because you have the location, physical location. So then that shipper is going to be quoting that freight forwarder to figure out how much it is that it costs to get that freight moved. And then that shipper is going to have shipment confirmation once they do agree on that. And that's going to be with the freight forwarder as well. There's going to be visibility and problem solving. That freight forwarder also is going to be providing that. And then once that compensation activity happens, that freight forwarder is going to be providing that as well to the shipper. And so this would be the case in any one of these instances where the shipper is working with the freight forwarder. Every activity is going to go through that freight forwarder. Now, the freight forwarder does have specific activities that they'll be involved with, and I'll show you those a little bit later on. But for right now, we just want to talk about what that shipper will be doing. So clearly, within that, if we were to say, okay, now if the shipper was working directly with the carrier, right, it would be the same thing. So the customer, if they wanted to just work directly with carriers, they would come in and they would start prospecting for carriers. That customer would quote the carrier. Shipment confirmation would be with the carrier. Visibility and problem solving, and then also the compensation activity, all would be with that carrier, right? Same thing with the broker. Same deal. All right. So within this, the customer is going to be using different sort of tools in order to manage their business. Some of these tools, the freight forwarder, carrier, and broker may not need to have, but it would be useful depending on the role. So a customer is going to use a customer relationship manager called a CRM. This will help them to keep track of their orders, the sort of activities that they're doing with their customers to keep those in order. They also would have a warehouse management system. So this is going to allow the customer to be able to manage the shipments that are going in and out, the prices of shipments, stock levels, numbers, that sort of thing. This helps the shipper to be able to keep that in order. So now that we understand the shippers using this because they have shipments in-house at their physical location, what agent, right, what role here in the industry will also more than likely use a warehouse management system? Correct. The freight forwarder. Because as we discussed, the freight forwarder is going to have that physical location as well. So the freight forwarder, in a lot of ways, is behaving exactly like the shipper. And they would have this WMS because they need to behave the same way the shipper does with that freight because you're an extension of the shipper. The shipper is going to have an ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning. This is used for managing your inventory levels, more ordering. So demand planning would have something to do with this. Yeah, that's as much as I could really get into that with ERP. I have used it before. Systems like Peachtree and Sage are examples of ERPs. However, I haven't used them a whole lot, so I'm not going to act like I know a lot. If you want some more information on that, just go ahead and look it up and you'll see what an ERP is. But that is something that shippers do use. And then we have our TMS, which is a transportation management system. So this is something that every one of the roles in this industry should be utilizing because this allows you to manage your shipments that are coming in from the customer. It allows you to manage your carriers. It allows you to manage your drivers. It allows you to create all of the documents that you need in order to work with the shipper. So you'll be able to create rate confirmations. You can create bill of ladings, proof of delivery, invoices, those sort of things are all what you will find the ability to be able to create within the TMS. And so the customer would also have a TMS because if that's what the carriers and the freight forwarders are utilizing in order to manage the shipments from the customer, it would be good for the customer to have this as well. So one of the big reasons why you want to have a TMS also is because it allows you to be able to communicate directly with your shipper without them sending you emails. So there is a form of communication within the TMS called EDI. So EDI is something that you can set up with your shipper when you have a TMS. If you don't have a TMS, you cannot set up EDI with your customer. So EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange and is the intercompany communication of business documents in a standard format. The simple definition of EDI is a standard electronic format that replaces paper-based documents such as purchase orders or invoices, right? So let's see, we can find the EDI codes because there are specific codes that go along with, look at Union Pacific, which is a railroad company. Hey, look, here's the difference. So a traditional document exchange of a purchase order. So the buyer makes a buying decision, creates a purchase order and prints it. The buyer mails the purchase order to the supplier. Supplier receives the purchase order and enters it into the order entry system. Buyer calls the supplier to determine if the purchase order has been received, or the supplier mails the buyer an acknowledgement of the order. See, a lot of touch points here. It's inefficient, or it can be inefficient when there's a better way. Here's an EDI document exchange, right? This process normally occurs overnight and can take less than an hour. Makes the buyer decision, creates the purchase order, but he doesn't print it. Why not? Because the EDI software creates an electronic version of the purchase order and transmits it automatically to the supplier. You see, that's one of the things that we create with these relationships that we're starting with our shipper, is that we want to create efficiency for the shipper. This is why the freight forwarder has a warehouse, because he knows that helps the shipper, which strengthens his relationship with the customer. Having a TMS is crucial for speed. The supplier's order entry system receives the purchase order and updates the system immediately, right? The supplier's order entry system creates an acknowledgement and transfers it back to confirm receipt. Everything's getting done right there, right there. It's amazing. And so if Union Pacific, which is a massive company, right? One of the first railroad companies in this country, if they're doing this, we should be doing this, right? We should be doing this. Most TMSs like Ascend TMS, if you wanted to set up EDI with them, it usually costs like $1,500. They will have the engineer to create the EDI connection with you for the shipper. And in most cases, it's going to be per shipper that they'll charge for that. I'm pretty sure you might be able to find someone to do it on like Fiverr or Upworks that is an engineer and can create that connection for maybe a little bit more economical price. But Ascend TMS is one of those TMSs where you could get that done. So those are the tools that the customer would be using. Here's the different activities, right? Prospecting, quoting, shipment confirmation, visibility, problem solving, and compensation activity. These are all the things that the shipper would be doing, and these are the individuals who they would be interacting with at every stage of that if they were interacting directly with those individuals. Again, here are the tools that shippers are using. We got a customer relationship manager, warehouse management system, enterprise resource planning, and a transportation management system is what a customer would be using. Some cases, all right, the customer may even have a load board. And why I say that is because some shippers will have a transportation department where they'll be booking their own freight. So if that is the case, then the customer may have a load board as well, DAT, which gives them the ability to post their shipments themselves. Most shippers probably not going to be doing that though, because they need, especially if they're large enough, they need speed. They need that EDI connection. They need to get those orders out. So they're probably not going to do that. Now, customers like Amazon, Amazon does have their own transportation system. And I have seen Amazon because there's a lot of people who do Amazon Relay. So we were involved doing Amazon relays. I'm the vice president of Jaffe Logistics. We do have a 26-foot box truck out in Chicago area. We were working with Amazon. We were working on the Amazon relay board, like what Box Truck Shotty is doing. Shout out to you, by the way, bro, killing the game. Um, and what we noticed was when we were working with Amazon, we would be looking at loads on the Amazon relay board, and then we can go to the load board and find that same exact load being posted by an Amazon representative for three times more than what it was on their relay board. We found that to be very interesting. We weren't surprised by that because obviously shippers would want to have some sort of competitive advantage. What it did, though, is it alerted us to the lack of confidence and trust that a shipper has in these entities who do have their authority. So the freight forwarder, the broker, and the carrier. There's a lack of trust that Amazon had, which made them go to the board and post it for three times more. Now, why they would want to take advantage of the fact that some carriers may not be looking at both of those boards simultaneously, I'm not sure. That's what this course is for, though, to protect us from those sort of activities because they are happening. If we're not paying attention to these different sort of boards and keeping an eye out for what it is that's happening, then we end up falling victim to some of their predatory practices. And I mean that in not a negative way, it's just the nature of the business in some ways. But again, this course is going to help us to protect ourselves from that. All right, perfect. So that's what our shipper is. Those are the tools that the shipper will be using. Those are the packs that those shippers are involved with. And these are each stage of their packs. These are the people that they will be talking to based on the sort of service it is that they're looking for. All right. And so I added one here too, because our customer is definitely using email to communicate with their customers. All right. So next, as you can see, I've got it color coded here. So we're going to be talking about our broker next. Okay, spoke. So we're going to be talking about our broker now. So our broker is when they come into the industry, the broker goes ahead and gets his authority. The first person that the broker is going to be prospecting for is the shipper, right? Because they need shipments to move. Once that broker does prospect and he finds him a shipper, he'll be quoting with that shipper and what a broker will use to prospect for a shipper, the tools that they will use. Most times, brokers will have, I'll put these down here actually. Broker might have a shipper's list. All right. A broker may have some sort of lead generating software that provides them leads. And during this training, I'm going to show you guys another way to find shippers, but I'm not going to reveal that just yet. I want to talk a little bit more just about these roles and how they're operating currently in the industry based on my experience with working directly with them. And so once he gets to prospecting for that shipper, that broker finds him a shipper and the shipper says, yeah, we want to work with you. They'll get set up. So what that shipper will ask the broker for is their authority letter. They'll ask the shipper for their cargo insurance if they want to, because in most cases, the shipper doesn't even need to get the broker doesn't need to get the cargo insurance because according to the FMCSA, the broker only needs to have the broker bond. They need to have their Yeah, that's pretty much it. The broker bond and the authority are the two things that a broker would need in order to operate effectively within the industry. Now, there are some shippers who will ask for the broker to have what's called contingency cargo insurance. They asked that to add another layer of insurance for the broker. However, it is unnecessary for the shipper to ask the broker to acquire that, because once the broker does contract with the carrier, because the broker is not assuming responsibility for their shipment, and it states that inside the broker carrier agreement, broker shipper agreement, and the broker carrier agreement, which we'll go over in another. On day 3, we're going to talk about our agreements. Actually, day 4 is agreements. The So the broker will have the broker bond, he'll have his authority. And so then now he will start prospecting for, or actually, he's going to quote that shipper. So he'll quote more than likely using this tool, the load board. So that load board, it gives you rates on DAT. So when you go to DAT, that load board allows you to be able to get into. Hold on one second. I'm trying to see my password. One moment. Okay, so the broker would be utilizing the load board to create quotes for the shipper. He'll be quoting to the shipper, and there's a couple of ways that the broker should do that. But what I'm going to do is talk you through how most brokers are operating in the current paradigm that we're in right now. All right. And so he would be quoting the shipper, and he would use the load board. So if we go to DAT, say if a shipper was like, okay, I got a shipment, Terry, that's picking up in Chicago and is going over to Louisiana. Yeah, let's say Louisiana, Iowa. They say, hey, Terry, is going to ship in a reefer. And so then now I can search that. And so between Chicago, Illinois, and Louisa, Iowa, in a reefer, they're saying it will cost $986 to send it over to the shipper. And they're saying we have a range between $831 and almost $1,200 over a 30-day average for this 249 miles. So what a broker would do at that point is they would have to mark that shipment up. So before he sent that over to the to the customer, that quote, we would usually mark it up by, I would say, 10%. Set 96 times. So we add $98 to that. So we will quote our customer basically $1,100 to get this done. Now, most of the brokers are not reaching out to the carrier first to find out how much it is that it costs. What they'll do is they'll just try to mark it up enough to cover this range and make money no matter what. And then they'll come back to the low board and post it for maybe a couple $100 less than the low part so that they can extend their range. So instead of charging the customer $1,100, what the broker might do is, say $1,300 is what it'll cost to get that moved. All right, cool. So that's what brokers are doing. Here's something that a broker could do, though, if they wanted to keep it economical, right? So we could go in here and we could search for trucks, because this is the way that we can be able to get that shipment quoted right easily, and also have a carrier on hand to be able to get the shipment picked up if the customer says it's ready to roll. So if we do that, boom. So now it pulls up carriers who are posted on this lane saying that they want to go. This says anywhere. This guy says he wants to go to Iowa between these dates. So the broker could just call, any of these 57 carriers and ask them, how much it costs. So that way they would know exactly what it is. And then they would also have a carrier in hand. Go ahead, set that carrier up and anticipate that you're going to get this shipment from the customer. Call these guys up and get a rate on it to see how much it will cost in order to get that moved. But in most cases, the broker would just assume that that rate is correct. They would go ahead and mark it up in the way that we talked about. And, that's how we were marking it up in most cases. And I had to, in some, I did have a little bit of autonomy in some positions, but most positions I had to do exactly what they told me. And I didn't necessarily agree with what was going on. However, I needed my job. So they would go ahead and quote that shipper, but as I said, they could use the carrier to quote as well. And then we would go into shipment confirmation. And most of the communication that the broker is having with the shipper, in some cases, it is over email. But again, most brokers absolutely have a TMS. There's no way they're operating effectively without a TMS. And so once they do quote that shipper and the shipper says, yep, we're ready to roll, now the carrier, well, that's where the carrier does come into play. So the broker is also going to be sending shipment confirmation to the carrier, and he's going to send shipment confirmation to the shipper, right? He's going to go to that load board more than likely, and he'll post it on the load board. Once he does post that shipment, like we can do here, he can post that shipment on the load board, tell them when it's going to be picking up, where it's dropping off, the equipment type, whether it's a full or a partial, all of the information. And then at that point, we would post this. And then once we post it, it goes out to all of those carriers that were on that lane, like the one we just searched here. So I could do this two ways. I could search for it, which reduces my exposure. This is what I used to do. This will reduce my exposure to people knowing that we don't actually have relationships with carriers. I would search for the truck, find 3 to 5 carriers. I would get rates from each one of those carriers, average out what would be the median price for all those quotes, reach out to the customer. I will mark it up based on that median price. And then once the shipper did agree to it, then I would come back over and I would look for the carrier that was the most economical so we could extend our margin. But I would go with the carrier who still had a driver available for us to be able to pick that up. And I would have exactly the amount that the carrier said they needed to get it moved. So the money that we made from the shipper, I actually earned that because I did the appropriate thing to make sure each entity was receiving what it was they should prior to me committing to the customer. Whereas most brokers, what they'll do is they'll just go in and post this shipment. And then now they're going to field phone calls to find out like who can do it for the cheapest amount. And so they call it beating the carrier down to get that rate as low as possible to extend that margin. So once the carrier does agree, the shipper has already agreed. So now the broker will use their TMS to create a rate confirmation for the carrier. He'll send that to the carrier to go pick up. And the shipper has sent to the broker a tender confirmation, which lets them know this shipment is for you. So once that happens, the carrier has that rate confirmation, the broker has that tender confirmation. Then now we're going to move into visibility and problem solving. And the carrier, there's going to be all these activities. So the broker will utilize their TMS. If they have EDI, right, they'll be able to send those codes over to the shipper, letting them know that the carrier is on their way, the carrier has picked up, right? And then the carrier is going to be sending that information. In most cases, they should be using a TMS, but in most cases, they're using email to communicate with the broker that they've gone to pick up that shipment if there's any issues during the visibility and problem solving stage. Once this shipment does deliver, the carrier will then send a proof of delivery actually, let me go back a little bit. So once that carrier does go to pick up the shipment, he's going to get a bill of lading from the shipping location. So the bill of lading is what's going to tell the carrier everything that's in there. And this is what, if they get pulled over while they're on the road, they can give this to the state trooper or DOT to verify that they are allowed to pick up that shipment. They were tendered it. It would tell them who the broker is, who the shipper is, and all those details. And the carrier has to have that in order to verify the freight that's inside of the shipment. Once that carrier does reach delivery, when the delivery location signs off on the bill of lading, then it becomes a proof of delivery. So before that is going to be a bill of lading, and that's where the carrier and the shipper will sign off on it when they go to pick up. Once the carrier gets to delivery and the delivery location signs off on the bill of lading, it becomes a proof of delivery. So that carrier then will utilize email to send it over to the broker. And then the broker with his invoice. All right. So the carrier is going to send the invoice and he's going to send the POD to the broker. The broker is going to take that proof of delivery, put the carrier invoice to the side. He's going to create his own invoice. And then now he'll send that proof of delivery and that invoice to the shipper, which starts the compensation activity for all those entities. So then now the shipper is going to pay the broker, then the broker will pay the carrier. Boom, shalom. All right. One of the other tools that the broker uses to find carriers is Carrier 411. Now, Carrier 411 is a very powerful tool. So Carrier 411 allows brokers to be able to search for carriers. It also allows you to validate your carriers. You can create due diligence certificates, and it gives you alerts, carrier snapshots. You can find carriers as well. And as you see, they're pulling this data directly from the FMCSA, which allows them to be able to have all of the carriers that are authorized to move right now. So like say if I had a shipper who said, hey, Terry, we've got 30 shipments we want to get moved out of Iowa and they're all going over to California. What I can do is come to Carrier 411 as a broker, and this tool is only available to brokers. Carriers, even though they have an authorization, they're not allowed to have this because of whatever reason. Carrier 411 does it. And so I can go here and say, okay, well, they got 30 shipments. Let me find a carrier that's got at least 50 trucks, right? So I can go in and I can search between those two locations, the equipment type that we would need in order to move that freight based on a commodity. And then I can just have it to search for carriers who have at least 50 trucks. And it'll pull all of the carriers that are registered with the FMCSA that have at least 50 trucks that ship, that are based in the state that I'm picking the shipments up from. And they move shipments into the delivery location where it would be going to. And so this would make it very easy for brokers to be able to find carriers. And hopefully by now, and I'm pretty sure because you guys are smart, you may be asking yourself, well, why are brokers using a load board if they can just find carriers on Carrier 411? I'll tell you why, because they be lazy sometimes. And they be lazy sometimes because it's faster to just go to DAT and you can go here and you can just post this shipment, put these details in, click on it, post, and then now you just wait. Whereas with Carrier 411, you would actually have to make phone calls to those carriers, very similar to how I showed you we can search for trucks. Really, it's kind of the same thing, except this load board is only going to show us carriers who are posted in between these lanes, whereas Carrier 411 will show me carriers who are originating in the place where we're picking up from, and that will go to any location in the country, right? Very, very powerful and effective tool to utilize. Is underutilized in this industry. Very powerful though. And one of the other tools that brokers use is Google Maps. Man, we used to use this a lot. So if your shipper does say, hey, Terry, we've got a shipment that's picking up in, say Illinois going over to California, and I could have just clicked on the link in there. So say we have a shipment that's picking up in, actually, you know what? Let's do something a little bit different. Let's say we had a shipment picking up in Pasco, Washington, and we want to go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. All right. What I would always do is I would set this up to where I could be looking at it from the perspective of the carrier. So what I want to do here is I want to add the terrain, and I also want to go to satellite view because now this gives me a real representation of what's going on. So if my customer said we wanted to pick up this shipment out in Pasco, Washington, I want to go look at Pasco and see what locations are near it so that I can get an idea of where my driver may be coming from or have to do. So as we can see, Pasco is, in the middle of some locations, right? It's right on the border of Idaho and Washington, pretty far from Seattle, right? Tacoma, those major areas. There is some things that happen over in Yakima, but as we see, it's a very small location. So more than likely, our carrier would have to have delivered something in Pasco in order for that to make sense for them, right? Or they may be located in Hermiston. Maybe they delivered here. But again, this is where the power of Carrier 411 comes into play because then now you can just search for carriers that have registered out of Pasco, right? And you can just get straight to the nitty gritty. And that carrier is going to know how to manage these locations here and give you a more effective rate than going to the load board, right? Searching for a truck out of Pasco, Washington. And that truck more than likely is not even from the Pasco area. So they can't give you an accurate representation of what it is that rate should be. They're going to tell you what they need based on where they are right now, right? And that can be good. See, look, right now, if we had a shipment picking up out of that area, we'd only have 6 carriers to choose from. Look at them. None of them from Washington, Illinois, Nebraska, California, right? None of them are from that area. So that's where Carrier 411 becomes a very, very powerful tool to be able to help us to locate carriers, really get good capacity for our shipper, and be able to book that shipment with confidence. All right. So again, when our broker comes into the industry, they're going to be prospecting for shippers. In most cases, they're going to be quoting directly with that shipper, using the load board to generate those quotes, right? We also talked about how they could be doing that with the carrier to get a good quote, but we're talking about what most brokerages do, the ones that I've worked at specifically, what they're doing. They will use that load board to quote the shipper. Once the shipper says, yes, I want to take that, they will use that TMS, hopefully to get that tender confirmation from the customer, maybe via email, the customer sending it over. And then that's when they would send the rate confirmation to the carrier. Customer's going to send the broker the tender confirmation. Then from there, the carrier is going to provide the visibility and problem solving, utilizing that email. Maybe they're making phone calls to the broker. And then the broker is going to be using his TMS or email, maybe a phone call to relay that information to the shipper. Once that shipment does deliver, our carrier is going to use his email or TMS to provide that proof of delivery to the broker along with his invoice. And then the broker is going to put the carrier invoice to the side. Then he's going to use either his TMS or email to send that proof of delivery and his invoice to the shipper, which starts the compensation activity. Okie dokie. So now let's talk about our carrier, right? So again, what I'm describing right now is how these entities that I know from my experience are currently operating within the industry. Not all entities are working this way. However, the majority of them are operating in this fashion. All right. So I want to give it to you exactly how it is from the horse's mouth. So that way we can understand a little bit better where our leverage is, where the areas of opportunity are for us based on this current paradigm. Because people are kind of stuck in a certain mind frame about how it is that things should be done within this industry. And so when you see, here it is right here, is a framework containing the basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology that are commonly accepted by members of a scientific community, a general mental model or framework of anything, an example serving as a model for others to imitate. Now, this is very, very good for the example of it because they are imitating a lot of what other people do. And yeah, Yeah. So boom. So when carriers come into this industry, they'll, get their authority. Now they're active because they have their insurance. They come in and they grab their equipment. So then they'll start operating. And what the carrier will do, or what most driving companies and most trainings out there, they're going to tell the carrier that you should be looking for brokers. All right. They're going to say you should be looking for a broker because that broker can find shipments for you. All right. So a carrier comes into the industry, he's going to be looking for brokers, and they're utilizing the load board in order to do that because that's where you can find shipments. All right. So let's go back to DAT real quick and I'll show you where we can find the shipments at. Why did it just happen again? Hold on. There we go. Okay. So what a carrier will do when they come to the industry, people will tell them go to DAT or use truck stop. I'm only going to use DAT for this example because this is one of the most widely used load boards. You'll hear this in truck stop a lot. Depending on the size of your truck, there are a lot of different load boards out there. Don't waste your money on that. I'm going to show you how it is that you can find everything you need without even using a load board, really. So the carrier will come in and he'll say, okay, my truck ready to roll. I'm going to search for loads. This is what a carrier will have to do. So the carrier will come in and say, okay, my truck is in Dothan, Alabama, and I want to go over to, hmm, let's say Gaffney, South Carolina. All right. If that carrier has a flatbed, click on it, I guess. Flatbed, boom, and he say, okay, I want to move shipments today, right? Boom. This is what a carrier would do. Now you see why this causes an issue, right? Because now this carrier, if they're located in this area, which is the southeast, this is a very challenging area to operate out of. And if we think about it, who is really out in the southeast like that? You come to this board and you're not going to really have a lot of options, right? You would need to expand on your deadhead miles. And I'll come in and show you guys a little bit more about the load board later, but not right now. I'm just going to show you what the carriers are doing. This may give us some more, boom. So now it gives us more results, but this means now that the carrier is going to have to travel further to pick up and more than likely deliver further out than the location that they were planning on going to. But as you see, adding mileage gives you more results. However, it does create a level of inefficiency and added expense to the driver, which means now the driver is going to need to ask the broker for more money. All right. So we can kind of see already how we lose leverage by utilizing this load board in that way. But again, I'm going to show you all what sort of tools you can use to mitigate that issue. So he'll come in looking for the broker. They might come in looking for a freight forwarder too, if they, depending on what their mix is for shippers that they're looking for. But I'm gonna tell you, I've not one time talked to a carrier who said they were looking for a freight forwarder, not once. So broker, right, and then he'll be utilizing his load board to find those shipments. So once that carrier, the broker and the carrier decide, they quote each other, right? Right? The broker's gonna say, "Hey, I got this shipment that's picking up in Alabama. It's going over to North Carolina. I'm showing it's gonna be 13,000 pounds, full shipment. Pick it up on the 7th. Delivery is gonna be standard transit, and we're looking to be at, let's see what it says: Dothan, Alabama to Gaffney. Let me see. How can I convert this to a carrier search? Let's see what it's saying that cost would be. Let's go to tools. Boom. That was Dothan, Alabama. That was Gaffney. And we're in a flatbed. But saying that would cost us $1,528 to get done. So then that's what the broker will send over to the carrier and say, okay, we can try to do that amount, right? And then again, we already see what sort of activity it is the broker is doing with the shipper, utilizing their tools. And so then from there, if the carrier says, okay, I can do it for the 1,500, the broker is then now going to use again his TMS to send over to the carrier the rate confirmation. In most cases, most of the carriers that I've worked with for sure, they don't have a TMS. So they'll be getting that rate confirmation from the broker via email. All right. So the broker will email that over to the carrier. Carrier is going to go ahead and sign off on that. If the carrier is not set up, they would have to send over the broker their W-9, their authority letter, and their proof of insurance, the COI. Sometimes the broker will ask for the carrier to make them a certificate holder of that insurance, which once we get into the regulations from the FMCSA, we'll see that that's unnecessary to do. But anyway, so that shipment confirmation will start, and then the carrier will, send their documents via email to the broker. All right. So then once it's time to go pick up that shipment, the carrier is going to communicate with the broker again via email and let them know, hey, I'm at the pickup location. Then the broker again is going to utilize his tools to communicate that to the shipper. And then once that carrier does pick up, he'll get that bill of lading, right? Then he'll go ahead and take that over to delivery as long as there's no issues. And he'll be communicating any issues with the visibility and problem solving via email, maybe phone call. Once he does get to delivery, then receiver signs off on that bill of lading, which makes it the proof of delivery. And so now he's going to send his invoice and that proof of delivery to the broker. And then the broker does his thing with the shipper, and that creates the compensation activity for the carrier. And carrier get paid. All right. That's it. Now, y'all smart, right? So one question I see right here, right off of the bat, I would ask is, and that is a great question, because if a carrier, here's a move you can make, right? A carrier could come into this industry and not even get their authority. They could come into this industry, find a broker, tell the broker that they want to attach themselves to the broker's authority as a carrier, and then they can enter into an agreement, and we'll talk about agreements later. They can enter into agreement with that broker to become that broker's carrier, and then that MC number could be used for the broker, which would allow this person who has a truck to not even have to have their authority, because you're attaching yourself to the broker who has an authority, and a broker can be asset based. It's two types of brokers: non-asset and asset based. Asset is a broker that has trucks and equipment. Non-asset based is a broker who has no equipment. All right. So that is one way that they could do that. And that would make sense to me, that the carrier would work through the broker in that way. But if the carrier has an authority to be able to work with the shipper, why is the carrier using the broker to work on behalf of work with the shipper on behalf of them? Is because in this current paradigm, these dispatching companies, these driving schools, they're telling you all that's what you're supposed to do. And because everybody's been doing that and everybody's been saying that, this is what they do. And what happens is the carrier, and I not challenge you, but I would say go and ask a carrier. If you know family members who are in this industry or anybody that's in this industry, they will tell you that the brokers are pushing the rates down, right? But the industry is telling carriers to work through the broker. But what that tells me is that the carrier is acting out of ignorance, because why would you not exercise the full authority of your authority, right? Why are you working through the broker? If you can find shipments on the load board on your own, right? Why would you work through the broker? But that's because most shippers are not on the load board for real, right? Because of what we talked about. The shipper is working directly with the carriers and the freight forwarders and the broker, right? So the shipper really don't need to have a load board like that because the broker already have it. So 99% of the time, this load board, these shipments are brokers. These are not shipping locations. Look at the names. These are not shippers. These are brokers, right? So we give up our power by not really understanding what it is. See, look, broker carrier, right? Now you tell, yeah. Now you tell me why they posting this load on the board if they're a carrier too, right? Why? And they're not a carrier too because they don't have the carrier insurance, right? Why? Because that's what the industry is telling people to do. And so people are doing it, which is why paradigm is why I put that there, because that's what they're in currently. And they're giving up their power, basically, to the broker. All right. So very similar to freight forwarder, it's very similar to what the broker is going to be, what the broker did. Just let's go ahead and just fill that in. There's no reason for us to make it complicated, right? Same demo. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. My bad. It's going to be this. Same deal, right? Same deal. Only difference between a freight forwarder and a broker is a freight forwarder has a building. That's it. That's it. A carrier is basically a mobile freight forwarder. A freight forwarder is an immobile carrier, and a broker is a poser, basically. Broker don't have nothing, right? All right. So this is how these entities are set up. And as you can see, who is it that is left with the least amount of leverage, the least amount of area of opportunity? And that is the carrier. Because a carrier in this current paradigm is really the only entity that has an authority that's choosing to give up their power to another entity in order to get the job done. All right. Now I know everybody's like, well, the dispatcher. Yeah, I know. But the dispatcher does not need an authority, right? We're talking about authority levels, right? Ones that are authorized by the FMCSA to be able to transport goods across state lines or in state lines for shippers, right? Why? Giving all the power up. And the only reason why is because people are telling them to do that. All right. So that concludes this part of it where we broke down our roles. We know who has authorities, right? Shipper doesn't need an authority to be able to ship freight. They just need to be a business entity and whatever it is they have to do in their state to be able to register to do whatever they do. That's a whole nother process that we don't need to be involved with unless you are a shipper. But we just went through each of the entities that need to have an authority. We saw that those entities have to have the applicable amount of insurance in order for them to operate as a carrier. They're going to need to have that equipment. We talked about the different activities that everyone in this industry are doing. We talked about the tools that these entities are utilizing in order to do their jobs. We talked about who they're talking about at each stage of these activities to complete their jobs. And we also talked about, and we can very clearly see leverage and who has it within this industry. All right. That concludes second part of our training. Thank you.